the Texas sun, was unforgiving, a divine anvil upon which the air shimmered. In the dusty courtyard of a ranch-turned outpost, small clouds of grit rose with each cruel laugh. At the center of a circle of Mexican soldiers knelt Elias Preston. His hair, white as Brazos cotton, was matted with dirt and blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. A leg wound, courtesy of a bayonet, kept him from standing firm, but his shoulders, though stooped by age and pain, did not buckle under humiliation. His eyes, of faded blue worn by time, fixed not on the men surrounding him, but on the distant horizon, where the land met the sky in a promise of freedom that, in that moment, felt like a lie. Captain Mason Griffin, a man whose vanity was as immaculate as his blue and gold uniform, circled Elias like a patient vulture. He was not Mexican by birth, but had adopted the cause with the fervor of a convert, a fervor that translated into contempt for those he called traitors, Texans who dared dream of a flag of their own. "Look at him, boys," Griffin said, his voice sharp as shattered glass. "This is a Texas hero, an old man who can't even stand. Tell me, Anciano, where's your courage now? Where are your brave rangers?" Laughter echoed, harsh and hollow. Elias didn't reply. His mind was far away, in a time when his hands were strong and held his sons, a boy now sleeping in the sacred soil of Goliad. He had promised that boy this land would be a place of honor. Now, honor seemed like worn-out coin. Beside him, tied to a porch post, young Luke Carver watched it all, hatred and helplessness knotting in his throat. He had seen Elias fight. He'd seen the old man place himself between the soldiers and a terrified family, buying them time to flee before being overwhelmed by numbers. Hero. Yes, he was a hero the world seemed to have forgotten. Griffin kicked lightly at Elias's wounded leg, eliciting a muffled groan. "I asked you a question, old man, or perhaps loyalty to your ragtag Texas has made you deaf. Renounce that ridiculous flag. Beg for your life, and perhaps I'll let you die with a little water in your throat." The ensuing silence was heavier than the heat. Elias lifted his face, and the look he gave Griffin held no fear, only a deep, ancient disappointment. "A man only begs when he has something to lose, Captain," Elias said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I have already given this land all I have." A quick flashback, like lightning. Elias handing a rifle to his son, not with pride, but with the weight of a father sending his most precious possession to war. He remembered seeing the signs months before. Men like Griffin, who spoke of order and progress, but whose eyes gleamed with the lust for power. He had warned his neighbors, but the hope of peace was a song too sweet to ignore. Now, the melody was a funeral dirge. Griffin smiled, a gesture devoid of any warmth. "Moving, but your land, as you call it, now belongs to Mexico, and your sacrifices are worthless." He crouched, his face inches from Elias's. "I want you to say it. Say Sam Houston is a coward and Texas is a lost cause." Luke Carver struggled against his ropes, a cry of fury trapped behind his teeth. Seeing that giant of dignity reduced to this was more painful than any physical wound. Elias closed his eyes. The image of his son smiled at him in his memory. He couldn't tarnish that legacy. "Never," he whispered. The word was almost inaudible, but it echoed across the courtyard like a cannon shot. Griffin's patience ran out. He stood, drawing his pistol. The click of the hammer being cocked was the only sound in the world. The soldiers stopped laughing. The entertainment was over. The execution was about to begin. "So be it," Griffin said, leveling the gun at Elias's head. "Your loyalty will be buried with you." The hot desert wind, which had only stirred dust until now, seemed to shift. It carried a distant, almost imperceptible sound, the steady rhythm of an approaching horse. No one paid it any mind at first, except Luke. His hunter's eyes narrowed, scanning the plain. Griffin smiled with satisfaction, his finger beginning to press the trigger, but as he did, the wind brought a name, whispered from soldier to soldier, a legend that refused to die and would soon make them all tremble. Crockett. The mirage on the horizon solidified, but it was not the figure Luke's desperate hope had conjured. It was merely a lone rider who passed in the distance without so much as a glance toward the ranch. The brief spark of hope extinguished, leaving reality even grayer. Griffin let out a bark of laughter, relishing the disappointment that hung in the air. Were you expecting a savior, weren't you? A ghost from the Alamo? Let me tell you something about your heroes. They're all dead, and Texas has forgotten them. He holstered his pistol, deciding a quick death was a gift Elias didn't deserve. Humiliation was a slower, crueler weapon. His attention was drawn to Elias's hand, which, even in pain, clutched a small, worn leather pouch tied to his belt. With a rough yank, Griffin tore the pouch from the old man's grasp. "What have we here? Gold to buy your freedom?" He opened it and poured the contents into his palm. It wasn't gold. It was a single, crudely carved wooden star polished by years of touch, a child's toy. Elias's composure broke. The mask of stoicism cracked, revealing raw, deep pain. "Give it back," he said, his voice a desperate plea. "Please." Elias's vulnerability was like wine to Griffin. He held up the wooden star for all to see. "Look at this. The great Texas patriot keeps a piece of trash. What is this, old man? A charm to bring you luck?" Memories flooded Elias's mind, more vivid than the blinding sun. He was sitting on the porch of his cabin years ago, the scent of fresh pine in the air. His young son, no more than 7, watched with admiration as he carved that very star. "Is it like the one on the flag, Papa?" the boy had asked. "Yes, son," Elias had replied. "It means no matter how dark the night gets, there will always be a light to guide us home. It means hope." He remembered telling his son about the men at the Alamo, about Bowie, Travis, and especially Crockett, not as mythical figures but as neighbors, men who believed freedom was worth a life. He had taught his son that honor lay not in victory, but in the courage to stand for what you believe. Now, kneeling in the dust, he felt the weight of that lesson. Griffin spun the star between his fingers. "Hope," he snickered. "Hope is a disease. I offered a cure." He turned to Luke Carver, still bound to the post. "You, boy, show your friend what I think of Texas hope." He extended the star to Luke. "Spit on it." Luke looked at the star, then at Elias's devastated face, and then at Griffin's cold eyes. The fury inside him burned like prairie fire. He lifted his head and spat, but not on the star. The spit landed on Griffin's polished boot. The crack of the slap that Luke received echoed across the courtyard. His head lolled to the side, the corner of his mouth bleeding, but his eyes blazed with defiance. Griffin's patience had completely run out. He threw the wooden star to the ground right in front of Elias. "Then let's finish this," he growled. He raised his boot, aiming for the small symbol of a father's promise to his son. Elias closed his eyes, a tear finally tracing a clean path through the dirt on his face. He couldn't watch anymore. The world narrowed to the imminent sound of wood splintering under a tyrant's heel, but the sound didn't come. Instead, a new sound cut through the taut silence. It wasn't the wind, nor a distant horse. It was a man's voice, calm, but laden with the authority of rivers and mountains. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Captain." All eyes turned. Standing at the entrance of the courtyard, as if materialized from the heat itself, was a man. He was not tall or imposing, clad in worn buckskins, and carried a long rifle with the familiarity of a third arm. But it was his eyes that held attention. They were clear, piercing, and held not an ounce of fear. Murmurs spread among the soldiers, this time not as a legend, but as a shocked recognition. The name was spoken aloud by a young recruit, his voice trembling with dread and awe. Crockett. Griffin didn't know it, but by raising his boot over that wooden star, he had just summoned a ghost who feared no men like him. Davy Crockett did not hurry. He walked into the center of the courtyard with slow, deliberate steps, and the circle of soldiers parted before him like the Red Sea. His eyes took in the entire scene in an instant. The young man bound and wounded, the old man kneeling, the small wooden star in the dust, and finally, the captain, whose face was a mask of arrogance and surprise. Crockett's presence shifted the atmosphere. The oppressive heat seemed to lessen, and the air, once heavy with cruelty, now thrummed with a different tension, an ancient anticipation. Mason Griffin recovered from his initial shock, straightening to his full height. The authority of his uniform seemed a fragile shield against the gaze of this man. "Who dares interrupt military affairs?" Griffin demanded, his voice a little higher than necessary, betraying his nervousness. "I am Captain Mason Griffin, in service to the Mexican Army." Crockett stopped a few yards away. He didn't answer the question. Instead, his eyes fixed on Elias Preston on the ground. There was a recognition there, the silent solidarity of men who had seen the ugliness of war and understood the cost of freedom. He acted as if Griffin didn't exist. With 2 strides, he was beside Elias. He knelt, not with pity, but with deep respect. "Can you stand, friend?" he asked, his voice low and rough as walnut bark. Elias looked at the face he knew from stories and posters, a face more weathered and tired than the legends told, but with the same unyielding determination in its eyes. With the help of Crockett's steady hand, Elias leaned on his good leg and, with a groan of pain, managed to rise unsteady but on his feet. Crockett then stooped, picked up the small wooden star from the dirt, wiped the dust away with his thumb, and gently placed it into Elias's palm. The gesture was simple, yet profound. It was the restoration of a promise, the return of honor. Only then did he turn to face Griffin. The captain's anger had turned to fury. To be ignored was a greater insult than any challenge. "I gave you an order. Identify yourself. This man is a prisoner, a traitor to the legitimate government." Silence stretched. Griffin's soldiers looked from their captain to the newcomer, their loyalty visibly shaken. They served a uniform, but the man before them was Texas incarnate. "He's just a foolish old man," Griffin spat, gesturing dismissively at Elias, "a symbol of a dead cause. He is nothing." Crockett finally spoke, and his voice, though calm, carried the weight of every battle fought and every man lost for that land. He looked at Elias, whose chest swelled with newfound pride, and then his hunter's eyes fixed on Griffin, sharp and deadly. The sentence he spoke was not a war cry, nor a threat. It was a statement of truth, simple and undeniable, that disarmed Griffin more effectively than any bullet. "This man, Captain," Crockett said with a pause that made the world hold its breath, "has forgotten more about courage than you will ever know." The sentence hung in the air, and with it, all of Mason Griffin's authority dissolved into dust. The words had not just defended Elias, they had judged and condemned Griffin before his own men. The contempt on the soldiers' faces was now not for the old prisoner, but for the captain who tried to humiliate him. They saw the truth in those words. They saw the difference between the bluster of a uniform and the quiet strength of conviction. Griffin stood, agape, speechless. He looked to his men for support, but they averted their gaze. Some slowly lowered their rifles. He was alone. His authority, built on fear, had evaporated under the Texas sun. "Get out," Crockett said, and it was not a suggestion. "Take your men and your false law and leave. There is no place for your kind on this land." Humiliated, trembling with impotent rage, Griffin turned his back. He mounted his horse, barked an order to his men to follow, and rode away in a cloud of dust and shame. Justice had been served, not with gunpowder, but with a single sentence. As the people gathered in the makeshift ranch square and watched Captain Griffin depart, no one cheered. They simply removed their hats in respect for the man who delivered justice without spilling hate. With Griffin's departure, the tension dissipated like morning mist. Crockett walked over to Luke Carver and, with his hunting knife, cut the ropes binding him. "You've got grit, boy," he said with a nod of approval. "Don't let anyone take that from you." Luke rubbed his wrists, his eyes brimming with a gratitude words couldn't express. He had just witnessed a legend in action and discovered that the legend was made of something far more real and powerful than campfire tales. It was made of integrity. Elias Preston, clutching the wooden star in his trembling hand, approached Crockett. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick. "They wanted to break our spirit." Crockett placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "The spirit of Texas, friend, is like an old oak. It may bend in the storm, but its roots are too deep to be uprooted by any passing wind." He didn't linger for more thanks. With the same quiet discretion with which he arrived, he prepared to leave. He shared a little water from his canteen with Elias and Luke, a simple gesture that forged a bond between 3 generations of Texans, the veteran who endured, the youth who resisted, and the icon who inspired. As Crockett mounted his horse, Luke called out to him, "Where are you going now?" Crockett looked at the vast horizon, a faint smile touching his lips. "Where there's a good man needing help and a tyrant needing a lesson. Texas is a big place." With that, he was gone, riding toward the setting sun, becoming a silhouette once more, a promise on the landscape. Elias and Luke watched until he disappeared. The pain of Elias's wounds was still there, but the weight on his soul had been lifted. He looked at the wooden star in his hand. His son's legacy, now also a symbol of the day honor, was defended and restored. Years later, the ranch prospered. It became a place of refuge, a gathering spot for those who believed in the values Elias had nearly died for. Luke Carver became a man, a leader in his community, telling the story of that day not as a tale of a supernatural hero, but as a reminder of what ordinary men are capable of when they refuse to bow. As for Mason Griffin, he was not killed in battle. His fate was far more Texan in its justice. Stripped of his command, disgraced before his superiors and his men, he lived out the rest of his days in obscurity, a man forgotten by history, haunted not by ghosts, but by the memory of an old man, a frontiersman, and a simple truth he could not defeat. He tried to break that man, but ended up breaking himself. In Texas, true revenge is living free when the enemy lives bound by their past. Freedom, as Elias Preston taught Luke Carver that day, is not just a piece of land or a flag. It is the dignity we carry within, the courage to protect the weak, and the certainty that even in the darkest hours, a single voice speaking truth can be more powerful than an entire army. Texas does not belong to those who rule. It belongs to those who stand their ground. If you were moved by this story of courage and honor, Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any Old West legends. Share this video with everyone who is proud of their roots and believes that true values never die. And don't forget to comment from which city you are watching. We want to know how far the spirit of Texas has traveled.